What's going on, everybody? Welcome back, Face Off Sports Network. I'm Anthony Servino with my top starts and sits at the running back position for NFL Week 7. But before we get into the action, let's recap how we did on this video for Week 6. Tony Pollard, he was a start, 17.8 PPR points. David Montgomery, another one of my starts. He had 21. My third start didn't work out too well. James Conner, only 6.6 PPR points. Now to my sits, a little bit shaky here. And I think I need to do a better job trying to read into the injury reports a little bit better. But both Ramondre Stevenson and Rachaad White, who I had listed as sits, they both did not play. And Jerome Ford, my other sit, only had 1.4 PPR points. But I also think I referenced in the video, I did not like Patriots running backs whatsoever last week. Antonio Gibson only managed a handful of PPR points. He certainly did not go over that 10-point PPR point threshold that I used to separate a hit or a miss. So going to do a little bit of a better job reading through the injury report and trying to be a little bit more predictive so I can give you more actionable content to use. That one's on me last week. But now let's get into this week's action at the running back position. We're going to start Brian Robinson. Absolutely love Brian Robinson. And this is a player who did miss last week's game as he's pushing through a knee injury. The good thing, we have positive news. Brian Robinson returned to practice on Wednesday, which means he's on track to play in this week's matchup. And it's a dream matchup against the Carolina Panthers. And we know the Carolina Panthers, their run defense is the worst I've seen in a long time. They're ranked dead last when it comes to fantasy points conceded to the running back. You could start multiple running backs from the same team against this football team and feel pretty damn comfortable that you're going to get production. In fact, last week we saw both Bijan and Algier, 17 and 25. Week before that, Roschon and Swift, 14 and 20. Week before that, Moss and Chase Brown, 17 and 23. Week 1, Kamara and Jamal Williams, 12 and 22. And then we saw Dobbins and Alexander Madison both go for double digits themselves. But all but 2 games this year, the RB1 and the RB2 of a football team put up enough fantasy points where you can use both in your starting lineup, which means this is a big week. We can use Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler in our lineups. And let's remember, folks, this is a prolific running attack. And these guys have been ultra productive anyway, even in bad matchups together. Brian Robinson comes back off the injury. He's getting 16.2 touches per game. He's averaging 72% of his yards after contact. He's averaging 3.2 actual yards after contact. He's averaging 12 yards after the catch. This is an emerging all-around back. And I get he concedes some of the workload to Austin Eckler, but you absolutely positively want Brian Robinson locked and loaded in your starting lineup anytime he is active. Every single game this year, he has given us double-digit PPR points. He's also scored at least 1 touchdown in all but 1 game this season, and the Giants blanked him in week 2, but he still managed 14.6 PPR points as he went for 133 yards rushing. We are absolutely starting Brian Robinson. Next up, Chuba Hubbard. Chuba Hubbard's been sensational this year. Even with Jonathan Brooks looming, he's not expected to come back, at least not this week. Chuba Hubbard should be locked and loaded in all fantasy lineups, even in the bad matchups. And we've seen Chuba Hubbard since week 1. He's been sensational, at least 11.6 PPR points in every single game since week 2. And he's had some, last week against Atlanta, that was not an easy spot. Still managed 15.3 PPR points, still managed 92 yards on the ground. In fact, he's had at least 92 yards rushing in 4 straight games, going north of 104 yards twice. He's getting the touches. He's also getting the targets. He's had at least 4 targets in every game since week 1. 3 of those games getting at least 5. 18 touches per game. He is getting 2.9 of his yards after contact. He's getting 12.1% of his team targets with a 91.7% catch rate. Chuba Hubbard is the real deal. He gets Washington this week. And the reason why I'm telling you to start, like this isn't like a no-brainer, but it should be. Game script worries me here because this is one of the highest Vegas totals on the slate, and I fully expect Washington to come out and get an early multi-possession lead. And that could potentially game script Chuba Hubbard out. In most cases, I'm worried about that. Not here. Because again, like I said, Chuba's catching passes, and Carolina, they're going to still run the ball even if they're down a little bit because of Andy Dalton, because they need the enemy defense to be able to not pin their ears back and go after Dalton. So they're always going to attempt to run, and they've been running well with Chuba Hubbard. So I'm not too worried if the game gets out of hand. I still think Chuba Hubbard is going to get enough to give us fantasy production. And Washington's defense, this is a defense that can be had by the running back. Obviously, not everybody's, Derrick Henry, who went off last week, but they've given a production to guys like Rachaad White, Singletary, Moss, and James Conner earlier this year. The only team that couldn't really get going on the ground was Cleveland, but they did have two of their backs combined for over 15 PPR points. So Washington is certainly a good matchup that we should, despite potential game script situations, Chuba Hubbard should be locked and loaded. We're going to go to Tony Pollard next. This is another guy. Tony Pollard, a pleasant surprise, been absolutely outstanding in our fantasy lineups. He's the guy, right? And again, Spears is there, and he concedes some work to Spears, but 18.8 touches per game. That's 89th percentile amongst qualifying running backs. And he's doing it as a receiver. 13.4% of the team targets, and he's being targeted on 21.1% of the routes he is running. 67% of his yards are coming after contact. I get Tony Pollard had a little bit of a speed bump in Dallas last year coming off the lower body foot injury. But fully healthy, this is the Pollard we thought we were getting in Big D last year when we were drafting him late in the first round. Now Pollard's one of the biggest values in fantasy drafts this season. And if you drafted Pollard, you're a really happy fantasy owner. So far this year, Tony Pollard has gone over 15.2 PPR points in all but one game. Like I said, getting the yards, getting the targets. He's explosive. And he's productive despite the fact that Will Levis is a joke. Can you imagine how much production and how much better Tony Pollard would be if he had the same passing attack he had in Dallas? Only now the enemy defense, they look at Will Levis. They know they don't have to respect him. They're going to stack the box on Tony Pollard. And despite all of that, he is still getting it done. And now he gets the Buffalo Bills, the second easiest matchup on paper for enemy running backs. We saw it last week. Breece Hall jumped out of his slump against Buffalo with 21.9 PPR points, 113 yards rushing, and another 56 as a receiver. In fact, we've seen this Bills defense give up 57 receiving yards to Ogunbowale in week 5, 56 to Breece. Last week, 78 to Justice Hill in week 4. They're 69 to Achane in week 2. They're being gashed by pass-catching running backs, and we know that's what Tony Pollard does really well. They're also being gashed by on-the-ground running backs. Achane, Henry, Hall, all over 96 yards rushing. Even Etienne in a bad season went for 68 a few weeks ago. Tony Pollard should be a slam dunk in our fantasy lineups this week. Remember, if you like content like this, hit the like button. Hit the subscribe button and the alert icon so you can be notified anytime we are live to answer your questions. We do that about 5-6 times a week. Or when we drop content just like this, if you have start-sit questions, trade questions, waiver questions, ask them in the comments below. Myself or one of my teammates will get back to you as soon as we can. Now let's go to my running backs to sit. Zack Moss. Zack Moss, folks, sensational start to the year. He's in danger of losing his job. to Chase Brown. In fact, last week, Chase Brown was the first game he out-touched and out-snapped Zack Moss. Zack Moss is heading in the wrong direction. In fact, he was benched in last Monday night's win or Sunday night's win over the New York Football Giants. Season low, 6 carries for 13 yards. What about week 5 against Baltimore? Well, 9 for 24, 3 for 28. We are seeing the opportunities trend in the wrong direction for Zack Moss and trend in the right direction for Chase Brown, who all offseason long, folks like myself believe Chase Brown was a superior running back and it was going to be his backfield at some point. Well, that some point is now. And now Zack Moss gets Cleveland. There's not a lot of good things we could say about the Cleveland Browns. But what do they do fairly well? They're pretty good against enemy running backs. In fact, they managed, and I'm pulling that up right now, they managed to limit Saquon Barkley last week to under 10 PPR points. Only one running back has scored more than 14.8 PPR points on this Browns team. That was Singletary in week 3. The Browns have been very, very solid. Get some high floors here and there, but very all-around solid at containing the enemy running back. And obviously, they played their best game last week against the best running back they faced all season in Saquon Barkley. I am sitting Zack Moss. He is extremely, extremely touchdown dependent this week. Let's go to another one. James Conner. I had James Conner as a start last week. He fell on his face. Now I have him on as a sit. And we are sitting James Conner against the Chargers, who are a top 10 team. They're the 10th best team when it comes to fantasy points conceded to enemy running backs. And Conner, he's kind of going in the wrong direction. In 2 out of his past 4 games, under 8.6 PPR points, and 3 out of the past 4 under 12. This after starting the year with over 17 PPR points in 3 out of his first 4 games. So, kind of on a downswing right now, and a lot of it's because Kyler isn't playing up to par. Neither is Marvin Harrison Jr. A lot of it is on the shoulders of James Conner, which is fine. But if this offense is humming the way it kind of was in the first 2 weeks, James Conner is a really good running back in our fantasy lineups. Right now, he's a questionable running back in our fantasy lineup. Sure, he always has the touchdown upside, but he has not had a carry inside the 5-yard line since week 4. And he's only had 2 red zone touches total in his past 2 games. The targets are sporadic this year. He has 3 games with exactly 1 target, the other ones with 3, 4, and 5. So we're not getting that pass catching floor like we think we have. He's still getting 17 touches per game. The efficiency isn't there either. Only 58.6 yards after contact. That is 33rd percentile, an 83.3% positive run rate. That's 41st percentile. So, a little bit of a worry here for the normally trustworthy James Conner. Like I said, I don't love this matchup against the Chargers. This is one of the better running defenses in the NFL when we're talking about the Los Angeles Chargers. They've given up only double-digit PPR points to 4 different backs this season. That's it. They've only allowed 1 rushing touchdown and 1 receiving touchdown to the running back position this season. This is an extremely stingy and stout defense. I'm worried about James Conner this week. Let's close with another sit, Kareem Hunt. Listen, Hunt's been good. 10.5 PPR points and 18.7 in his first 2 starts back in the NFL. Has the bye week. He's rested, but he's going to San Francisco. This is an ascending run defense. Obviously not as good as it's been in years past, but still quality, especially at home. What's good about Hunt, he's getting touches. He's had at least 16 touches in the past 2 games he's played, topping out with 28 touches against New Orleans in week 5. I don't think Kareem Hunt can keep up with 22 touches per game. He's getting a touch on 58.7% of his snaps. I don't think he can maintain that at this juncture of his career. And if they're going to give him that type of workload against the 49ers, the Chiefs might lose this football game. Kareem Hunt scares me this week, despite the fact that he's been really productive, surprisingly productive. There's also some reinforcements on the way. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, he's been activated and he's returned to the active roster, and he's probably going to play this week against the 49ers. Again, he's not a world beater, but he's somebody who knows the offense and can jump in there and take away some of those 22 touches per game that's going Kareem Hunt's direction. So we take in CEH, a potential downswing in touches, and a middle of the pack to bad matchup against San Francisco 49ers. And I'm sitting Kareem Hunt in week 7.